them very popular across the boundaries. And then one other thing is to go back to the Uko Fulani, and that we have the notion of how do we even cross over in Kenya, especially in Christian music. And one artist that has done that is Giuliani, and Jesse had a chance to interview him. I wanna show you. He's one of the most popular artists now across all genres. This is a song recorded, I think, in 2004.
Love. Hello. This signal, hello. Niko pregnant na love na kwangu kila siku May 1st, Labor Day. Hata kaa cheki na 0 kama degree Celsius. Aliniambia ni first, ndiye anilete toothpick. Nimekumbana ni evidence in case nikatae kulipa. Mtapitia hitika sushi, presha ya wanafunzi njia.
I think he's popular because of his ability to play with words. I mean, every single song is to play with words. He starts his song by saying, Niko pregnant na life, na kwangu, kila siku ni May 1st, Labor Day, hata kaa cheki ina 0 kama degree Celsius. He says, I am pregnant with life. Every day is May 1st. May 1st is Labor Day in Kenya. So pregnancy and labor. But he's pregnant with life. He's struggling with life. And every day on May 1st, the president does a speech that says, I'll do this for the workers, I'll do this. But he says, I'm still struggling. And he says, when my check has 10, like degrees Celsius, they still ask me to pay first to just be served a toothpick. So again, it's talking about issues that are affecting people. But this is an artist that is a Christian. Used to be with Uko Fulani Mau. Accepted Christ 6 years ago, but has not changed his style of music. But he says his source of inspiration is God, but he's still very popular. And what he has done is he's gone beyond what people think of music as sort of this social message. He says it is a product, and he's packaging it to sell it. He has all the right connections. He has the CEO of Safaricom. Safaricom is the biggest mobile service provider in Kenya, which sponsors a lot of music. He has him. I mean, he is following him on Twitter. He has like 25,000 followers on Twitter. When he wants to do a show, he just goes on Twitter and says, "Hey, I am in this neighborhood tonight. Are you gonna come and see me?" So that's a person who has really been able to package himself without losing the message, and he's saying we need to move on. He has also something that he's calling us Kama CCC, if it is not us, for young people. He's saying we need to have businesses and buy from each other. So he has a company that he has majority shares, but he has other artists to come in and make some money and distribute T-shirts and hats and other things in the music. But also he has a third thing that he's saying we need also to invest. So he's going around and teaching young people how to save. And he's asked some of the savings banks to say, can you help the young people who may not make a lot of money start saving? So he's packaged himself as saying, I came from the hood, but I don't want to live my life the way I used to live. So it's a different kind of a hip-hop artist. Something that has not been done. He's not afraid to be commercialized. He says, I will sell whatever I can, but I will not lose the message. And it also brings some questions about, can you still be an authentic hip-hop artist when you are in the mainstream and selling with, being commercialized by TVs and other things. And finally, I wanted to say that when we think of hip-hop artists, we should think of them as, that's something that we can talk about, but it's one of those one-song stars or a six-month stardom, and that's it, and you're gone. Thank you.
We should scoot closer together. Our heads will be in because we have to share this microphone. I'm just going to ask a few few questions based on this sort of initial introduction conversation. A couple of things came up, I think, in both of your talks that was similar, and one of them is this idea of a social message. What the message of the music is for a local audience, and how that connects with other audiences or doesn't. And I wondered if you could comment on that a little bit, as well as the cases where that's not necessarily the goal of the artist to communicate a social message. I know we had done a similar panel on this subject 2008, and one of the issues that came up was like, okay, well, it's not all hearts and flowers. It's not all like we can do this and let's all band together. But that does seem to be an overwhelming theme with a lot of the artists you've mentioned and that we've talked about for the exhibition. So I wonder if you could address that issue.
I think the social issues, especially in Tanzania, seem to be almost unnatural. I think a lot of musicians that I've seen coming out of Tanzania, even when it's sort of a song about partying and other things, there's something about saying something useful to other people. In a way that it's almost an obligation for artists to represent others. And something else that I've found, especially in Tanzania, is even though Nyerere's regime didn't succeed, or what his philosophies didn't succeed, he was able to inculcate a certain cultural philosophy in Tanzanians that has them not assume this sort of air of importance. So, I mean, you can have access to any artist in Tanzania, and you can walk with them, you can go see them. It's a little different in Kenya, where, if you have a hit in Nairobi, suddenly you may have some bodyguards, and, it's hard to access you, but it felt like that's what is happening. And so they do not forget that they are also representing others. But there's also the other side of survival as well. A lot of these young people have to make money. Many times they will say the options is to go choke someone or make some money, and it's not always the music that has the serious messages that sells. It's the one that's that's party, and So if you can combine the message with what the audience wants, because it's a product for the most of them. It's a product with what the audience wants. Then you're able to do that. Yeah.
I would say a couple things to that. One is sort of what you brought up, and this is sort of a question that all of us can think about. What's the politics of the market? Because in some ways, some artists would say, and you hear this everywhere, well, there's a politics to surviving, and that particularly people coming from no money and no resources, that simply eating and being able to support people around you is part of a politics. Other people would disagree and say, well, if you do that and you commodify yourself and then just make money, that's not politics. You have to talk about issues in the community. And that's something I think that in and of itself is a debate. The other thing that's interesting about how you voice stuff. So I think you saw from both of the things that we said in some of the videos that traditional images and stuff like that are revived through hip-hop. So Obrafo means executioner in the traditional chief's court. And Obrafo is also traditionally someone who speaks, who's a poet. There's also a power to indirection. Certainly in Ghana, and certainly in a lot of places across the continent, you don't say things maybe as directly as you might in an American political public sphere. You say things with elegance, you say things with indirection. One of the things that, I speak Tree, but I wouldn't say I was ever fluent, but I spoke sort of well, but I could never understand jokes in Tree. And part of the reason I couldn't understand them, I realized, is because part of the point of a joke in some ways was you're telling a joke so that someone maybe doesn't get it, or they get it a day later, or there's a kind of temporality to those kinds of humor, and who knows something, who doesn't. So a lot of artists will invent words or make things kind of indirect, and then, wait a minute, maybe you realize that it's actually sexual innuendo or political critique, or maybe it is political critique, but it's not taken as such, or more importantly, vice versa. There'll be songs that are metaphors about someone going to the jungle and doing something, and everyone says this is a critique of corruption. So the song is banned, and of course that makes it more popular. And the artist can sit there and say, that's not a political critique. What are you talking about? I was just talking about this poor antelope who was hanging out in the jungle. And so there's a way in which the politics of how you speak is itself something that's really fascinating, right?
Sorry, can you tell the sax story related to that, because it fits so well?
Oh yeah, that's a story of a Tanzanian musician named Remy Ongala. My first real sort of ethnographic research with a musician, and he had this ability to use music to talk about controversial issues. And when I first started doing research, I went to his home in Dar es Salaam and talked to him. But there were also people from the UN arm of health, I think it was UNAIDS, looking for him because he had this song called "You Play Soccer Using Shoes and Socks," and everybody knew that he's not talking about a soccer field or a soccer match. Socks are euphemism for condoms, but in Tanzania, as it was in many other parts of Africa, you do not talk about sex openly. But they wanted to see, because it was such a popular song, and they wanted to say, okay, how can we use this song to leverage some of the messages that we're putting through in our educational programs? And so that, again, I think as Jesse is saying, the ability of music to say things that you cannot say openly. I mean, if somebody came to an audience in Dar es Salaam and said, "I want you to start wearing socks," it'd be very different reception than when somebody comes with a song and says, "Hey, when you start to playing that, everybody wears a good jersey, but the most important thing is to put on socks." And then people can play with that, and what is being talked about without directly talking about it. And I think that's the sort of playfulness of music that allows it to penetrate without being threatening. And some musicians have been able to do that and still remain non-controversial.
Yeah, I'm just going to actually just ask one more question, and then I think I would love to open it up to the audience, because I'm sure you all have some great questions. Just the last sort of, I want to end with another common theme that we've talked about today, has to do with technology and circulation of the music and relationships between different artists. And one of the most poignant examples of this, Jesse, that relates to Kenya, is when you were talking about your time there, and you were with someone from South Africa, and you were tweeting about it in London. And I wondered if you could talk about that as a way to address for the audience the way this information circulates. Because originally when we had started talking about this exhibition, we talked about sort of looking at things geographically and using these geographic locations to tease out themes about politics and social mores, and where hip-hop was used in very sort of specific ways in places. But we've quickly, I think, now moved away from that because it's so much more advanced in terms of the technology allows for these circular flows, and that has a lot to do with language, which we've already discussed, but I think in many ways even more so technology. And so after you address that, maybe we can just keep the microphone and we'll open it up.
So this is a quick sort of answer in relation to the music industry in general. As we all know, the music industry has changed all over the world, and these big record companies are really anxious about what to do. Local musicians have gotten a voice through things like YouTube, and now the corporations have been trying to catch up. Universal Music Group, trying to catch up. How do you kind of grab onto these informal networks of technological movement? As I said, an artist, part of what's interesting about sort of hip hop is that an artist with a PC can make a beat and put on some lyrics and then circulate it either through radio stations, whether you pay them or not, or now more and more through Bluetooth, MP3s, and people are listening to it all over the city, and now the radio station's like, well, I better play it because it's the hot thing now. Technological change has become this crucial way that new artists are linking together. I'll tell that quick story. So I hadn't spent any time in Nairobi before, so I was in Nairobi for a couple weeks this past January with Zeno, who is the founder of Black Rage Productions, which was one of the major South African production companies, which produced South African hip-hop artists like Tumi and The Volume, a lot of the Kwaito artists in the 1990s. were very innovative in thinking about what is black entrepreneurship, how do we talk about black street culture in South Africa, and that's a whole other story which we can touch on if we have time. But Zeno and I are in Nairobi, and we met up with sort of the local impresario who kind of runs hip-hop in Nairobi in East Africa named Buddha Blaze. Actually, partly through Rab was the one who connected us. So there's a kind of network of connections. And so we're going around sort of meeting artists there, meeting Giuliani, and Zeno's kind of interviewing them. Blaze really loves Twitter. I'm not a big Twitter person, but Blaze has got like 10,000 people on Twitter. So we'd be going somewhere in Kibera or something, and Blaze would say, okay, you know, Jesse's here from New York, Zeno's here from Joburg. Come hang out with us. We're going to be in Kibera talking to Giuliani or Octopizzo or something. And so suddenly hundreds of people show up, right? Is really, you know, and then you move around, and then we were Twittering with Mensa, who's a Ghanaian artist who's based in London, who has a new album out last year called Number One Mango Street, which I brought a couple copies to and gave to some local DJs, and so they were playing them when we were in various clubs. And then Mensa was responding to the DJ, and they were sort of tweeting and back and forth. It's interesting because you make kind of very quick connections around musical kind of life, but at the same time, as you pointed out, 6 months is a really long time, right? This is kind of instant fame and instant disappearance, right? So there have been 18 million things that have gone on since January, so Twitter life is something that's very quick and very ephemeral. So a lot of artists, maybe they have some kind of instant fame, they make one hit, and they're kind of engaging with the audience. On the other hand, then where does that go? How do they turn that into something that's actually a public voice or some kind of economic possibility?
Yeah, I would add that the value of technology is the ability to not be controlled, and I think that has helped a lot of artists to make connections that could not be done. For instance, you could be in your place in Nairobi and share music with someone in Dar es Salaam, and they can mix it for you and send it back. So there's some ability to share without the control of passports and visas and all that. But it also allows for these kinds of shared platforms where two artists can have similar ideas and they decide to do what they call collabos, collaborations. And I've seen that over and over because of the ability for technology. You do your part, I do my part, we send it to this studio that we both know, mixes it up, and we start distributing it to our different audiences. There are also artists that have just been able to sell all their music through the internet, like Uko Fulani or someone called Muki Garang, who could not be played on many of the radio stations. They basically sell their music through the technological platforms. Yeah.
Yeah.